So welcome everyone to this series of webinars talk on Srimad Bhagavad Gita. We have titled these talks broadly as Karmanyavadikaraste, based on the famous verse from Bhagavad Gita. And this is the second talk of the series. And this is a humble gift of knowledge by UOR class of 96, University of Roorkee class of 96 batchmates. And we have done one class in the from last to last Sunday, same time. So we will now progress further on our discussion, and the topic that we will be taking today and discussing it on a little bit elaborately is who am I? And that is actually the topic which is we will be discussing about the science of soul or the knowledge of soul. So like you see, who am I? And there is a Sanskrit phrase at the bottom of this phrase, who am I, which is Avinashi tu tat vidhi. So this question, who am I? Who am I means what is my real identity, has been specifically answered by Lord Shri Krishna in Bhagavad Gita's chapter number 2, verse number 17, where he says that actually you are the indestructible soul. And he mentions few qualities of soul in that verse. And that's how the two are related together, and that's how we forwarded you in the poster that we sent to all of you for invitation for this talk. Okay, let us start this talk on an auspicious note. I have made some changes in the Mangalacharan prayers. I have limited the prayers mainly to two aspects. One is to start the class or start this session by offering our respects to our teachers, because only because of the teachers we learn this knowledge, and let us pay our respect to them. And then we will recite a famous verse from the Vedic literature, where we are seeking for happiness for all and auspiciousness for all. So kindly join me to recite these words. You can continue to recite at your respective places while keeping yourself muted. So the first one is Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. The translation is, I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my teacher opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respects unto him. Then Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukh Bhag Bhaved. May all become happy, may all be free from illness, may all see what is auspicious, and may no one have suffering. So for those who are joining us for the first time, a very brief introduction about myself. My name is Anurag Gupta. I am a chemical engineering graduate from University of Roorkee, now known as Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, from the 1996 batch. Presently, I am working in the capacity of senior heat transfer engineer in a multinational company, Shell Projects and Technology, based in Bangalore, India. I am initiated in the Vaishnava tradition, and in the Vaishnava circles, people generally know me by my initiated name, which is Keshav Gopal Das. And I have experience of studying Bhagavad Gita for around 15-16 years and deriving inspiration from the divine teachings of Bhagavad Gita, taking inspiration from it. I have now also started to present some talks and share this knowledge with people in general. And now we are doing this particular initiative specifically for University of Roorkee, or say IIT Roorkee students of current year, of current time. And a little qualification I have in the spiritual circles, that is known as Bhakti Shastri, a degree offered by ISKCON Board of Exams, which teach mainly 4 books, and Bhagavad Gita is one of the primary books that has been taught in this particular exam. So now we will further our discussion on the topic of soul. And presently this presentation I have divided into 3 broad categories. The first category is need for spirituality. The second category is second section, where I will be talking about rationale for spirituality. And the third one is what actually we are looking for spirituality. After we understand that what is spirituality, what results are we anticipating from all that understanding? So spirituality does not just mean something feel good. There is something which is very fundamental to us, very fundamental spiritual side to us. And it is not that spirituality, is it only faith based, or is there any some science or scientific evidence behind it? And if we accept what is spirituality, if we understand what is spirituality, what benefits are we anticipating in the long run? So that is the whole crux of the presentation today. And let us explore all these answers in the coming slides. So the first section is based on need for spirituality. And let us start with our discussion with this Gita verse, which is coming in second chapter, the 7th verse of the Bhagavad Gita. And we finished our previous presentation on the Bhagavad Gita with this verse: Karpanya dosho pahata swabhavaha prachhami tvam dharma sammudha chetah yachre shan nishchitam bruhi tanme shishyaste ham shadhi mam tvam prapannam. Let me do a brief recap how we arrived at this verse particularly. So we in the previous class we did this discussion on karmanye vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadashana, that particular verse, which was the 47th verse of the second chapter. And while discussing about that verse, we actually the way our thought went was, we first of all understood that only action is in our hands, and the result is not entirely in our hands. So that was the first teaching that we understood. Then we pondered upon that if the results is not entirely in our hands, then what are the other factors who are deciding the result of our actions? And then we progressed towards the concept of destiny. Then we said that is everything destined? Then we try to find the answer for that, and we suggested that no, everything is not destined. It is not that everything goes on automatically. We then mentioned that actually our karma is also linked with destiny. And after that, we pondered upon this theme called karma does not go waste. So even if we do some good karma in this present life, we will get some result. We will get a good result in the future. But then we introduce this concept that result might not come in this lifetime. It may take more lifetime, and the result, but certainly the result will come. If we do good karma, good result will come. If we do bad karma or bad actions, bad result will come. So that is how, in nutshell, we discussed in the previous class. And when we said that the result may come in more lifetimes or multiple lifetimes, that's where we introduce the concept of soul. Because if the result has to be attained in multiple lifetimes, the same person has to actually live the next life also. And that's where the concept of soul, concept of reincarnation was introduced in the previous class. That's how, connecting it with the previous class, that's how we are now discussing in this class what is soul. And the understanding about soul and the science of soul is actually fundamental to the understanding of Srimad Bhagavad Gita or literature. In general Vedic literature, it is very fundamental to understand what is the concept of soul. And that's where we landed upon this verse, where Arjuna is now asking Lord Krishna this question, Yachre Shan Nishchitam Bruhi Tanme. If you remember in the poster that we made in the previous for the previous class, that was the Sanskrit phrase we used, Yachre Shan Nishchitam Bruhi Tanme. And what does it mean? This means tell me for certain what is best for me. So each one of us are actually eager to know what are we supposed to do in this life. We all know that Bhagavad Gita is actually a manual for life. And that is the question that Arjuna asked from Krishna, where he is asking Krishna how should I behave? How should I act in this life? What is supposed to be best for me? Yat Shreshyan Nishchitam Bruhitanme. So that's where Bhagavad Gita discussion starts. But let us look at this verse in a little bit more elaborate detail. कार्पण्य दोषोपहता स्वभावः पृच्छामि त्वां धर्म सम्मूढ़ चेतः यच्छ्रेशान्निश्चितं ब्रूहि तन्मे शिष्यस्तेहं शाधि मां त्वां प्रपन्नम्. Now let us look at each of the meanings line by line. Karpanya dosho pahata swabhavaha. So now Arjuna is saying that due to miserly weakness of my heart, I am afflicted by this kind of miserly weakness and I am really confused. Prachami tvam dharma sammudha chetaha. Prachami tvam means I ask you. Dharma sammudha chetaha. Sammudha means confused, bewildered. Dharma sammudha chetaha. My chetana, my consciousness is now sammudha, is now bewildering. And I'm not very clear what is my duty. I'm confused about my duty. Yat Shreshyan Nishchitam Bruhi Tanme. Oh dear Lord, oh Lord Krishna, kindly tell me for certain what is best for me. And now Shishyasteham Shadhimam Tvam Prapannam. Now I am your disciple, a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. So this is how Arjuna is now expressing his bewilderment about loss of his composure, loss of his understanding what is good for him, what is not so good for him. In short, he's actually really confused what is his duty in this particular circumstance. And that is where I have underlined this word. I am ask you being confused about my duty. So Arjuna is now asking Lord Krishna, what is his duty? So developing that concept of duty further. So before we understand the response by Lord Krishna, let us understand two things here. One is duty and another one is identity. Now, as I have titled this slide, that the duty is linked with identity. Before we define duty, we first of all have to understand whose duty. That means we have to define the identity of the person whose duty we are going to define now. Now, for example, like we are engineering graduates, when we will graduate from the university, we will look for job. And typically how the job descriptions are published in newspapers or maybe websites these days, they will first of all have a job description or a job title, and then underneath the job title, they will have a job description. So job title is something to do with identity. What is the job title? And job description is something to do with duty. So example for identity could be multiple. From the employment perspective, we can have multiple examples. Somebody could be a manager, somebody could be an engineer, somebody could be a clerk, somebody could be a peon, somebody could be a vice president, and so on. Example from family perspective could also be many. For example, a person could be a husband, a person could be a father, a person could be a son. Similarly, a person could be a mother, a person could be a daughter, and so on. So these are the examples of identity. And similarly, from the nationality perspective, somebody could be a citizen of XYZ country, somebody could be a citizen of ABC country, and so on. Like that, these are the examples of identity. And what are the examples of duty? For example, a duty of a parent, a duty of a father or a duty of a mother is parenting. Parenting means providing care, love, guidance, protection, security to the children. Similarly, from the child perspective or from the perspective of maybe a son or a daughter, the duty could be different. Say, for example, a duty of a son may be to actually obey or conform to the father's instructions, follow the rules and regulations that are being practiced in the family, like that. Similarly, duty of from an employment perspective could be different. A clerk has a different duty compared to the vice president or president of the company has a different duty. Their duties are different. Their roles are different. And from nationality perspective, a citizen's duty is maybe to pay taxes to the government, or maybe to act in accordance with the laws of the country, and so on. So when Arjuna asked this question, please tell me about my duty, I'm confused about my duty. Uh, so what was exactly Arjuna's confusion? Arjuna's confusion was actually the clash between two duties. Hmm. Arjuna had two particular identities, and the duty of these two particular identities were clashing together, and that's where Arjuna was getting confused. So what were the Arjuna's two identities in Gita from Gita's study perspective? So one of the identity of Arjuna was he was a soldier. Like from Gita's perspective, we can call him a Kshatriya. Kshatriya means a person who protects, a person who protects the citizen of the country from unlawful activities and so on. So one of his identity was a soldier. Then the second identity of Arjuna was that he was a family man. Hmm. He was a and from Gita's perspective, how do we call this? Kula dharma. Hmm. So the Arjuna's identity as a Kshatriya was clashing with Arjuna's identity as Kul dharma. Hmm. So these two identities were clashing. And how were they clashing? He was engaged in a battlefield. He was engaged in a warfare where he was supposed to raise weapons against his own family members. And specifically, two family members were of prime importance here. One was Bhishma Pitamaha, and the second was his guru, his teacher, Dronacharya. So Arjuna had very deep respect, deep love for both these personalities, both for Bhishma Pitamaha and Dronacharya. And when you have this kind of an emotion towards any person, it is very difficult to raise weapons on these people actually, and when it is a occasion where you have to kill these people, it's a very difficult job. And that's what the clash was there in Arjuna's mind that was going on. The clash was between these two duties as a soldier versus a family man. So when he presents his case before Lord Krishna starts to instruct Arjuna. First of all, Lord Krishna reorients Arjuna. Reorients means what? You might have heard about orientation. You might have heard about orientation courses. Specifically, when you will get an employment in a particular company, you will notice that in first few days, the company will organize courses. They will call it orientation courses. Now, what is orientation means? Orientation means to understand what is our position in the company. And once we understand what is our position in the company, we understand what is expected from us to do in that particular role. That is called orientation. Now, Lord Krishna starts his discussion on Bhagavad Gita by first of all orienting Arjuna. He reorients Arjuna. Why do I say reorient? Because Arjuna at the moment is thinking that either he's a Kshatriya, he's a soldier, or he is a family man. That is the orientation Arjuna is now having, and that is where he's actually feeling confusion. He's having clash. There's a clash between the two duties, as a duty as a Kshatriya and duty as a family man. He's having that clash. So Lord Krishna, first of all, instructs Arjuna that, my dear Arjuna, please first of all understand that you are not this body. You are not this body. And why do he say so? He says so because, as I said, Arjuna is identifying himself as a soldier and as a family man. And Lord Krishna says that your identification yourself as a soldier and as a family man actually is based on your bodily identification. It is based on the platform of the bodily level. It is not that is how you are identifying yourself right now. And please understand that these identities are temporary. These identities are not permanent. These identities are temporary. And that's where he starts to introduce this concept of spirit soul or soul. And then he says that you are not this body, actually you are a spirit soul. Your fundamental identity is your identity as a spirit soul. So your identity as a soldier, your identity as a family man is temporary. It can change. When you will change your body, when you will die, when you will change your body, you will go to another body, you will take a different body. And that's where you will have a different identity. Maybe you are in your next life, you are not a Kshatriya, you are maybe somebody else, and your duties are different. That is why he's saying that your identity as a body is temporary, but your identity as a spirit soul is not temporary. That is actually your fundamental identity. And this identity is eternal. This identity is not something which is changing when you change your body. When you change your body changes, but you don't change. Your identity as a spirit soul remain the same. So he's differentiating now. He's reorienting Arjuna. Lord Krishna is reorienting Arjuna by clarifying him what is his fundamental identity and differentiating it with his identity, which is temporary. So he's saying your identity as a soldier and a family man is temporary, but your identity as a spirit soul is fundamental, and this is eternal. This will not going to change. Even if you change your bodies, this identity as a spirit soul will not change. And this is mentioned in Gita verse 2.13, which we will look in a short while. So now let us look at this picture. This picture is very graphical and tells a lot about what Lord Krishna is telling to Arjuna. So this picture is showing a small baby growing, becoming a young man, and then getting old, then dying, and then again this cycle continues. And here you can see there is a spark shown in each of these bodies. And it is showing here that this spark continues to exist in each of these bodies. And when the body finally dies, this spark continues to, in its onward journey, it continues to take these bodies and so on. So that is what Lord Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna, that you are not this body. Your body will cease to exist. Your present body, your current body will cease to exist, but you will not cease to exist. You are different from your body. And then once you cease to exist as body, this will continue to pass to the next body as a spirit soul. So this is the, first of all, the reorientation is done by Lord Krishna to Arjuna. What is the reorientation? Reorientation is that you are a spirit soul, you are not the body. And why he's trying to tell this particular thing? Because Arjuna has asked this question, what is my duty? Arjuna has asked this question, what is my duty? And that is why, first of all, Lord Krishna is reorienting Arjuna, that you first of all get a clarity on what is your identity, and clarity on that identity, which is fundamental, which is eternal. And then maybe we can discuss about what is your duty. So in nutshell, what Lord Krishna mentions to Arjuna about his duty is that that as a soul, you are on a journey, you are on a eternal journey of spiritual evolution. And that is how he explains Arjuna in nutshell. Maybe this would be the subject matter of Bhagavad Gita maybe in the later classes, but for the time being, what we should understand for the perspective of this particular lecture is, what Lord Krishna is trying to say to Arjuna is that you are not this body, you are a spirit soul, and you should look towards your duty as a spirit soul, not from the perspective of bodily platform, whether you are a soldier or whether you are a family man. So this is how, first of all, Lord Krishna tries to reorient Arjuna as he introduces this concept of soul. He says, Dehino asmin yatha dehe kaumaram yavanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namuhyati. He says, as the embodied soul passes in this body from boyhood to youthhood to old age, similarly soul passes to another body at death, and a sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Now he is explaining the concept of soul by giving an example. And this example is very, very graphic. Like we discussed in the previous slide, I have shown it in a different picture in this slide as well. He's saying, as the embodied soul passes in this body from boyhood to youthhood to old age. Now, let us try to understand this particular example a little bit. So what Lord Krishna is saying, that reincarnation is something which does not necessarily happen only when you leave the body, only when you die. It is not that the reincarnation happens only at that time. We are reincarnating even now, even our present moment, even in this lifetime. And that is how he's explaining this example. He's saying, like the embodied soul, Dehino, the one who acquires the Deha. Deha means body. So the Dehi is the soul who acquires the Deha. Like the embodied soul passes in this body from boyhood to youthhood to old age. Now, if you see this body, which is the body of a very small boy, and if you look at this body, which is the body of a very a young adult, the bodies are very different, but the soul in this body remains the same. So what Lord Krishna is saying, that as you are reincarnating in this body, similarly, when the body will not be of any use, you will reincarnate to a new body. Similarly, soul passes to another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So this is the way Lord Krishna introduces the concept of soul to Arjuna. And in nutshell, what are we trying to do here in this particular first section of our presentation today? Lord Krishna, first of all, introduces Arjuna this concept that, my dear sir, please understand that you are not this body, you are a spirit soul. You are not a material being, you are a spiritual being. And you should think like a spiritual being. And that is how Lord Krishna, first of all, reorients Arjuna. And the concept of soul is introduced in Bhagavad Gita. Now, let us ponder upon whatever Lord Krishna has said just now, that you are not this body, you are a spirit soul. You will continue to exist. You will not die. You are reincarnating even in this lifetime, and you will reincarnate. You will go into the next body in the next lifetime once you die. So now this is something, this might something appear a far-fetched idea to specifically a scientific mind, to specifically a mind which has been brought and studied, nurtured in a scientific environment, education, and so on. In the scientific environment and education, we are trained to believe that whatever we study, whatever we accept as knowledge, we should have some experimental basis, we should have some scientific basis to accept all that knowledge. So whatever Lord Krishna is now mentioning to Arjuna, is it something which is something very fancy, which is something very far-fetched idea, or what? So before we accept books like Srimad Bhagavad Gita or Vedic literature and so on, we should have a good degree of faith in this understanding of Bhagavad Gita. And we will take, in this particular section, we will discuss about rationale for spirituality. We will look into this section, that how a rational mind, how a mind who is logical, who is rational, how he can accept these understanding of concepts which sound too fancy or maybe too outwardly. How do we accept these concepts? So let us investigate this concept of soul from a rational perspective. So in order to present that rational perspective, I will take help of two ways. One is the intuitive understanding. I have given some examples from common sense, and then what the scriptures or literature like Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic scriptures describe the characteristics of soul, to actually look from all these characteristics of soul from an intuitive understanding perspective. So that is, intuitive understanding is one aspect I will try to investigate, this idea of soul. And the second idea is scientific pointers. Scientific pointers, one aspect is past life memories, and the second aspect is near death experiences. So people have gathered a lot of evidences on these two fronts, where they have interviewed many children, and checked from them what are their past life memories. And also we have uh, went through near death experiences of multiple people, where they have uh, given the account of what they went through in these trying circumstances when they were near their death. Hmm. So let us see what each of these ideas are to tell us about the soul. So let us start with a very common sense, intuitive kind of understanding. The first thing is, when we observe ourselves and the way we speak and the way we talk. Hmm, how do we talk? If we observe ourselves carefully, we will be forced to think about this concept of soul. And this is the way many spiritual leaders actually try to understand, try to make common people understand about the concept of soul. So let us see what it is. So for example, when we say my car, or we say my mobile phone, or we say my computer, we understand, when we say my car, my mobile phone, my computer, that particular object we are referring to is different from us. The car is separate from us. We are not our car, we are not our phone, we are not our laptop, like that. Similarly, we say my finger, or my head, or my eyes, or my legs, or my body. What does it mean? This also actually is trying to say, unconsciously we are trying to say, that our body is actually different from what we are in our inner core. What fundamentally we are inside this body is different from what we are referring to when we refer to our body parts. So this is one commonsensical understanding when we observe ourselves. Then when we observe others, when, for example, somebody passes away, somebody dies, how do we refer to it? He left us, he is no more with us, or she left us, she is no more with us. Or in Hindi we can say wo chale gaye. And then in Gujarati we might say vayo gayo. Vayo gayo. Now let us see, the body is still lying in front of the person. The body is still lying in front of the person, but still we say that he left us or she left us. So who left us? Who has actually gone away from that body, that we are saying that that particular person left us? But the body is still lying in front of us. The same body to whom we were embraced, to whom we will express our love, emotions, etc., is still lying in front of us, but we still say he left us. So there is something that is missing from that body, that has left that body, which we are trying to say that has left us. That is the actual person that was residing in that body, which is spirit, soul, that is left us. So this is two very commonsensical way of examples, intuitive way to actually realize the concept of soul, or to understand the concept of soul in a little depth. Let us further that discussion from scriptural perspective. Now, from our scriptures, from scriptures like Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literature, we understand that the soul has three characteristics. That is what scripture says. One of the characteristic is Sat, the second characteristic is Chit, and the third characteristic is Ananda. So what does Sat means? Sat means eternality, eternal, continuously living. This is called Sat. What does Chit means? Chit means consciousness, consciousness. Ananda, Ananda means bliss, bliss means pleasure. So this is the characteristic of soul that has been described in the Vedic literature. And let us see what does it mean for us. Sat means eternal. Now, how do we connect our feelings and our understanding of the word Sat to our own perception? We can understand this by pondering upon this particular thought, that each one of us want to have a longing for living. Nobody wants to die, and this longing is not only to live, this longing is actually to live forever. So we have this longing for living and living forever. And this longing is eternal and universal in all of us. Nobody wants to die. Even if you see this longing is there in animals also. If you want to approach an animal and want to kill an animal, the animal will resist. The animal will resist badly. He will not like to be killed. So this longing for living is there, and that is what the scriptures are defining. uh, the characteristics of soul is sat, eternal. It is eternal. So there is a longing for live, and that is how we can connect both the concepts. Similarly, chit means consciousness. And how does we feel when we are conscious? We feel awareness means we are aware of our surroundings, we are aware of our body. For example, if somebody pinches our body, we will feel. If we pinch a dead body, the dead body doesn't feel anything. Even if you burn the dead body doesn't resist. But if you simply put a small spark of fire on somebody's body who is alive, he will be really resisting to that like anything. So we are conscious, we are aware, we are consciously looking for knowledge around us. So we are aware. So that characteristic we do identify with. Similarly, ananda means bliss. We are all fundamentally pleasure seeking. If you go out and ask somebody, uh, do you want to become unhappy? If you go out and ask, make this survey, do you want to become unhappy? I bet you, I guarantee you, nobody will say that they want to be unhappy. Everyone in this world wants to be happy. That is a different subject. How they are trying to achieve that happiness. A boy is trying to achieve happiness by playing with a toy. A young adult is trying to achieve happiness uh, by by flirting around with girls, and girls are trying to find happiness by flirting around with boys, maybe, and so on. Or a young adult is trying to find happiness by earning more and more. Similarly, we are all pleasure seeking. Nobody will say, when you go out and ask, do you want to be unhappy? Nobody will say that they want to be unhappy. Everyone will say, we want happiness. So these are the three characteristics of soul, hmm, which are which the scriptures are telling us. And that is how, if we ponder upon these points, we understand that indeed we also feel like that. So that is another way of intuitively understanding the presence of soul inside us. Then let us now look for some scientific pointers. So the first pointer is near-death experience. Now, what is this near-death experience? So many people have given account of their near-death experiences, where there happened to be one point in their life. There had to be one occasion in their lifetime when they were on the verge of death. Actually, they clinically were proven dead when they were brought to hospital, or when they were in the hospital, and when the surgery was going on and when the treatment was going on. Clinically, all the parameters, if you look at the ECG, if you look at whatever parameters doctors used to see, they were declared clinically dead. But later on, they came back into their bodies once again, and they once again lived back to recollect the experience between what happened when they were declared clinically dead and the time when they once again became alive. So these are near death experiences, and these are not one or two experiences. These have been documented in great detail in the modern world today. So these are not uncommon, these are very well documented. And all these traits of near death experiencers, all those who experience these uh, near death experience type of situation in their life, whatever account they are giving back when they come back, they are very common. So typical accounts that they give are, they say that they see themselves leaving their body. Like you see here in the picture, you see in the picture here, a patient is being treated here by the doctors. They are trying to revive him again. The patient has been declared clinically dead. The doctors are making last attempt if they can revive the patient back. And the the subtle body of this patient, the soul and the subtle body of this patient has come out from this body, and this particular person is observing himself, observing his body from a distance, from some distance from the operating table. And So these people, they say that they see themselves leaving behind their body. They feel that they are floating away via a dark tunnel and they are entering into some other realm. So most of these people, when they start to feeling this near death experience, they give this account that they think that they are traveling very fast in a very dark tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel there's a very bright light where they are approaching, and soon when they approach the bright light they come to some other worldly realm. That's how they describe. And then they, in some cases they say that they observe their body and its vicinity from out of body perspective, like this person is observing. So this person is able to see himself, his body, the doctors and whatever surroundings are there. He's able to hear what they are talking, he's able to see, he's even able to smell, and so on. Then when they go to the other worldly realms, they interact, they give account of their interaction with some sacred icons from their religion, some deceased relatives of their from the past. They give all these accounts, and they also tell that they feel a profound sense of peace. They also go through a life review where the whole life is run in front of their eyes. They try to see this from a very objective perspective, what they did wrong, what they did right, and so on. And at some point of time during this experience, they are told either you decide you want to come with us, or you want to go back to your original body. Or sometimes these people from other worldly realms also tell them that you should now go back to your body, like that. And then they come back and return to their bodies. So this is something, a near-death experience typically happens. Now, as I was mentioning, that these are not one or two cases, there are hundreds and hundreds of cases. And I have named here in this slide some of the famous researchers who have researched on this topic. For example, Dr. Raymond Moody, he wrote this book called Life After Life, which was a pioneering book in the 70s, which actually brought this concept of near-death experience in front of the world. Before that, also near-death experience cases were happening, but because of social stigma, because of thinking that they will be humiliated or they will be ridiculed, people would not explain all those cases. But other famous researchers are Kenneth Ring, Michael Swabam, and so on. So this branch of study has grown to such an extent that there are now journal called Journal of Near-Death Studies. And this journal is actually published by an organization called as International Association of Near-Death Studies. This organization is based in United States. And I have given here the website where you can go and look into the cases or explore this website and try to understand what exactly these people are doing. And there are fresh cases of near-death experiences are published once in a while, all the time on this website, and you can read those for your own research or own confirmation. Now, some people might say that these might be hallucinations, or these might be some guesswork by the patients when they come back to life. Now, for that, I would like to narrate you a very small case where a lady by the name Maria, who had suffered a cardiac arrest, was admitted in the hospital. And she was there in the hospital for almost a week. And she was operated by Dr. Kimberly Clark. And while during the operation, Dr. Clark found that this particular lady, Maria, has now succumbed to death. She is no more. Clinically, all the parameters were showing that she is dead. And but later on, as I mentioned, this lady Maria actually became alive. And when she gave some account to this, what happened when she was out of her body, what experiences she went through. So she mentioned one particular point. She mentioned all the things that I saw you were talking with the nurses. I saw you were doing these kind of procedures on my body. She gave all those great details. And then Kimberly Clark was thinking that maybe for some reason she's just making a guess. Maybe that is how she's doing. Then one particular fact which this lady Maria gave to Kimberly Clark raised her eyebrows. She said that actually when I was out of my body, I went out of this room where you were operating me, and when I went out of this room uh, on the terrace, actually I saw a tennis shoe, and that tennis shoe was of this brand, it was of this color, it had these kind of details and so on. So she gave a lot of details about that tennis shoe. And when this Dr. Kimberly Clark heard about all those details, she was really surprised. She tried to look out from the window to see whether she can find any shoe or not. She was not able to look at it. Then she went few floors up and tried, and ultimately, with lot of effort, she discovered that shoe. And she was really taken by surprise when she found that whatever details Maria was mentioning about the shoe, all those details exactly matched from that shoe. So this is something which was a very punchy proof or an evidence that what Maria was describing was real. It was not something simply hallucination or guesswork or some whims and fancies of her mind. She was not storytelling her. So this near-death experience is one proof, one evidence. Then the second evidence is from the past life memories. The past life memories these are the stories of reincarnation. And before we discuss upon the scientific achievements on the research of reincarnation, let me give you some details about one particular incident. This incident of past life memory happened in Turkey in the year 1951 in the city called Adana. And the person who narrated this past life memory was Nesip Unlu Taskiran. That was his name. So from very childhood, this person Nesip had 7 birthmarks on his body. So he was born and he had 7 distinct birthmarks on his body since childhood. But when he was 6 years old, he started talking about his previous life. So he started to mention that that he was a person in such and such city, which was 80 kilometers from this town of Adana. And he started giving details about his past life. He started talking about the previous life when he was 6 years old. Then his parents continued to ignore this person, Nesip, for almost 6 years. But Nesip continued to be very persistent in his request that he want to go back to his old family, he want to see his wife, he want to see his sons, children, and so on. And at certain point of time, the family actually decided that let us explore what actually he is mentioning to us. And they took him to this particular town where he was mentioning. And detailed investigation actually, first of all, revealed that whatever he was mentioning was very correct. So all the statements that he was giving, all the accounts that he was giving was very, very correct. And what account he gave was that when the investigating team explored all these accounts, they learned that this particular person, Nesip, was actually a drunkard in his previous life. And one fine day when he was drunk, he was ridiculing, he was actually making mockery of his another person who was sitting on the table, probably drinking also along with him. And this other person, because of intoxication, became very angry. And out of anger, he took his knife and stabbed Nesip at different places in his body. So because this was a case of murder, Nesip died immediately on the spot. And because this was the case of murder, there was a post-mortem reporting was done, and all the accounts and details of that post-mortem report was available in the police station. When the investigation was done, it was found that the places where the knife was stabbed in the body of Nesip Unlu Taskiran, the person in this present life, the places where the knife was stabbed matched exactly with the birthmarks he had on his body in this particular life. So they actually did a very thorough job. They divided the body of Nesip into 160 parts. And each of these parts they try to identify, because if you stab the person on the hand, now you can stab on the shoulder, you can stand near the wrist, you can stand near the elbow. So multiple places you can do so. But the birthmarks matched very precisely with the wounds that were incurred in the past life of Nesip when he was killed. So typically in these past life memories, four particular things happen. These are recollection, recognition, behavior, and birthmark. What does recollection means? That when the boys or girls are of certain age, maybe 3 years, 4 years, and so on, they start to get recollection of their previous life. Then when they are taken to that place, they start to recognize their relatives. And not only they recognize their relatives, they also show emotions, the same emotions when they see their relative. For example, this person Nesip, when he saw his children from the previous life, he was very affectionate. He had these fatherly emotions towards those children. Now you can recognize these emotions. You cannot hide away from these emotions. Similarly, he had feelings of jealousy when he saw that his wife of previous life have married again, and he saw the picture of the second husband of his wife. So he wanted to tear that picture. So they also show that kind of emotions. And the fourth very strong evidence is that there are a lot of evidences of birthmarks on the bodies of these people, which correlates and confirms to the wounds from the previous life. So this is the another evidence from past life memory. And now for curiosity, for technical minds like yours, like all of yours, this is the person whose name is Dr. Ian Stevenson, who has been very instrumental behind the research on reincarnation. He died recently, fairly recently, in the year 2007. From 1918 till 2007, he was pretty old when he passed away. He was a professor in University of Virginia. He had done research on the subject of reincarnation for almost 40 years. He had investigated almost 3,000 cases, and all of these cases have been documented very meticulously by Dr. Ian Stevenson. And to his credit, he has 300 papers on reincarnation, and he has authored 14 books. So two of his famous books are 20 cases suggestive of reincarnation. So he had documented 20 cases, very strong cases suggestive of reincarnation. And he has also written this book called Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersects. So in this particular book, he has mainly talked about birthmarks and evidences based on birthmarks, where he has tried to correlate all these evidences with the wounds from the people from their previous life. So this is something, a section number 2, which we just discussed. Rationale behind spirituality is mainly to reinstate this point, or to first of all confirm this point, that whatever Lord Shri Krishna is mentioning in Bhagavad Gita about the concept of soul, it is changing bodies birth after birth and so on. We do see in scientific world also very similar evidences, even strong evidences, which points very strongly towards the concept of soul. This is something, an area where the two circles intersect. If one circle is spirituality and the second circle is science, now this is one area where we are talking about near-death experiences, past life memories. These two circle intersects. They talk something very similar. It is not that both are very exactly overlapping, but a great part of these circles are overlapping. So this is to further support the case that spirituality is not founded on simply emotions, simply sentiments, simply faith. There are scientific evidences existing which do point strongly towards spiritual being, spiritual existence of ourselves. Now, after doing all that discussion, let us also now discuss, what are we trying to achieve by doing all this? Okay, soul exists, we are eternal beings, but how does it matter? What is in it for me? मेरे लिए क्या है इसके अंदर? मैं क्यों इस बात की चिंता करूं कि मैं आत्मा हूं, मैं शरीर नहीं? Why do I bother about it? So that is one slide. I will try to bring that concept, and then we will wrap up the discussion. Result of spirituality. So first of all, it reorients us and provides a much wider perspective of life. Right now, our perspective of life is only limited to we are born and we will die. But when we understand that we are spirit soul and we are accountable for our actions, not only in this life, but in the future life also, that actually reorients ourselves. And what do we mean by reorient? As we discussed in the beginning of the lecture, reorient means they change our perspective completely. Now we don't look towards life only from this life perspective. We actually become very careful and very concerned that whatever actions we are doing, we cannot get away from those actions. Whatever actions we are going to perform, we are bound to get the results of those actions, if not in this life, maybe in the next life also. Like an intelligent person will worry about what will happen when he will retire. Will he have enough bank balance to sustain himself, to have a living, and so on. Similarly, this concept of soul also uh, ingrains a feeling that what are we supposed to do when we die? We not like we worry about our post retirement life. When we understand the concept of soul, we also start worrying about afterlife. We after this particular life, what are we going to do? Because that has strong implications on what are we going to get in the next life. Then the second thing is, we are spiritual beings. Material success alone is not sufficient. The concept of soul tells us that we are spiritual, we are not material. When we understand that we are spiritual, we then start to understand that spiritual pursuits alone can give us happiness. Material pursuits will not give us happiness. For example, when people engage in the mad rush for earning money, name, fame, power, prestige, and so on, ultimately they may acquire some of those things, but most of the time we see people in their life, they leave behind their family. Some people have divorces with their wives, some people have their sore relationship with their children, some people actually don't feel fulfilled even after acquiring and achieving so much in their life. Why is it so? Because their orientation in life was flawed. They thought that material things will bring success to them, but if they would have understood that no, material things are not going to bring happiness to them, only spiritual aspect of life is going to bring success to them or happiness to them, they probably would have lived a much better life. Now an example to that is a fish out of water. A fish is a natural living being of water. If you bring out the fish out of water and start to offer him hamburger, video games, magazines, money, sports, etc., the fish actually will not feel happy. Fish will certainly feel happy when the fish is back in the water. Similarly, we are spiritual beings in this material body. We are at the moment in this material body, and similarly, like this fish is feeling uncomfortable uh, by going for material pursuits. Similarly, we also, when we go for material pursuits, we will not feel happiness. We will feel happiness when we are placed back into our natural spiritual environment. Then we are going to feel happy. And then the third learning is, or the third benefit we of spirituality is, we start to see unity at the level of soul. At the we start now, what do we see? How do we see the unity? We see unity only from the perspective that we are human beings. Like many people say, many religious organizations also say that before you are Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai, Parsi, Jain, whatever, you are a human being. But Gita's level of unity is even much more deeper. It says you are not only a human being, you are actually fundamentally a spirit soul. And when we look unity at the level of soul, we start to see even animals who have soul, even plants uh, in harmony with the bigger nature. So the concept of unity, the concept of harmony, the concept of oneness, from the perspective of Bhagavad Gita, from the perspective of Vedas, is actually much broader. It is actually much more encompassing than our narrowed and rather flawed understanding of oneness only maybe at the level of humanity. And the last point that I have mentioned here is we start to face death with grace. A person who understands himself as a spirit soul, he faces death with grace. The perspective of such a person is that this body is getting old now. I'm not able to do much service to the people, to God, much more at this moment. When I will get a new body after I die, I probably will be able to do much more service with that renewed body, and that's how this person actually looks at death. So the fear of death is gone, or at least minimized to a good extent. So such a person start to see death and welcomes death with grace. He's not fearful. He's not surprised that something, an event called death is going to come soon in his life. So with that, I will halt on my discussion. I will stop this discussion, and let us now have some comments and questions from the audience. I hope that was useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the session.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, do you have any takeaways? Was all that somewhat enlightening? Something new that you learned, or you were aware of all those things? Any reflections? Any comments?
I learned so many things, like the concept of soul and the oneness and unity that you mentioned in the last.
Mm-hmm. Good. Very nice. Okay, let us wait for maybe a couple of more minutes if there are any comments or questions. But let me see who are all there. Priyanka Golia ji, welcome, madam. And I also see. Okay, I think that's all we have. Yeah. I think I see something on the chat box. Very much enlightening, sir. Comment by Rohan ji. Okay, fine. Thank you, Rohan. Thanks a lot.
अनुराग जी.
Yes, Prabhu. Yes, sir.
तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है मतलब very interesting illustrations and explanation. I really appreciate. But when soul transfers from one body to another body, and the kind of examples you have taken, in one example, I have some kind of thought. Appearance of wounds on the body. Soul is eternal. Body तो नश्वर है.
जी.
So wounds भी transfer होना, इसको हमको कैसे समझना चाहिए? How do we understand?
Yeah. So that's a good point, because that is something to do with linked with the subtle body. So when the soul transfers to the next body, it is not only the soul that gets transferred to the another body. It is actually also the subtle body. Subtle body is mind, intelligence, and false ego. So the soul is carried away by the subtle body, mind, intelligence, and false ego. These are some of the concepts which are discussed later in the Bhagavad Gita. And the presence of subtle body is all over our body. It is not something which is very specific point in our body, which is subtle body is located. So, like I said, these are evidences. These are I would not say that these are evidences which points towards the existence of soul. How you can confirm these things?
I agree with that.
Right?
That was the overall concept.
Yeah.
But for each and every example, like wounds and other example, so whatever reference is there, literature, I think it would be good. Though you have mentioned in one slide the author's names and also the website and everything, but corresponding to each and every illustration.
Yeah.
If one reference is given for more details, this has been explained.
So Dr. Ian Stevenson has actually written a handbook. Actually, he has written a book in 2 volumes, which is only dealing with this concept of biology and reincarnation. That is something almost 2,500 pages.
Okay. Okay.
So the
So all
evidence
this
is,
information you can make a small list and share with us,
sure,
so that interested people can go through them.
sure. So,
But yes, this is how once we accept that soul is there, accordingly remaining thought process will become easy to understand.
correct. Because
So in that sense, it is really appreciated. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think some more people are asking, having some more questions. Let me stop here.
Yeah. Okay. So can we start reading Gita in college life? That is Piyush. Yes, we can start reading Gita in college life. Actually, it is advisable to start understanding these concepts right from the as young as possible. So certainly that is recommended. But generally, our education system is not geared towards subject matters like Bhagavad Gita right from the childhood. So generally, people take up these subject matter when they are little grown up, and they start to understand the benefit of these subject matter. That's how generally people take it up. Yeah. And then Priyanka ji is asking, someone says that at the day of Ekadashi, we should not have to eat rice. So anything happened to our soul? What happens? Okay. What happens to our soul after death? Okay. So these concepts about not eating rice on Ekadashi, these are something which are what I would call is as spiritual practices. There is one concept called philosophy. Then the another concept is how to express that philosophy. So there are stories and there are reasons behind not eating rice or not eating grains in particular on Ekadashi day. So there are spiritual reasons and there are biological reasons, or I would say health reasons also for both of them. Maybe this is a subject matter which we can discuss at later part of our meetings. But suffice it to say that these are a little more advanced topic where we discuss about spiritual practices. How do we express the philosophy in practice? That's where we don't eat certain food items on a particular day, and there are reasons behind it. So that's how we can take it. They have spiritual benefits and both health benefits, and could be a subject matter of a later discussion. Then what happens to our soul after death? So there are a lot of details given in the scriptures that after death, the soul is first of all given a temporary body, which is known as preta. A preta body is given, and this is a temporary body. And finally, this preta body is shed away, and the soul, together with the subtle body, which is made up of mind, intelligence, and false ego. In Sanskrit, we call it as man, buddhi, and ahankar. So that soul is carried away with this mind, body, mind, intelligence, and false ego. The soul is carried away to the next body. Now, what is there in this mind, intelligence, and false ego? So the karma or the karmic reactions of our present life are stored there in this subtle body. Similarly, our desires are also stored in this subtle body. Now, based on the makeup of the subtle body, depending upon the karma and the desires, the material nature decides for the next body of this soul. So that's what happens to the soul after death. Okay, so these are the two questions that were there by Priyanka ji. So I hope I have answered that. So maybe if there are any other questions, maybe we can discuss. Okay, so if there are no further questions, I will put the class to rest, and we will continue further maybe in another 2 weeks with a new subject. And
Fine.
Thank you very much for your presence. Any words from my good friends Amit, Kunjan, Piyush, Gaurav?
So I was thinking that can we do more elaboration on these topics which are asked and cannot be answered in few words. They need a much more elaboration. For example, the spiritual practices or like the experiences which have been asked in the chat box as questions?
Yeah, so those can be done, but I would say now we can take different approaches. Now this is one topic of soul, then there is a topic of reincarnation and so on. Now one possibility that we can further dive deeply further into that, but as I have experienced presenting these topic in the past, there is another topic which is known as reading scriptures and having faith in the scriptures, because most of the scriptures are Shabda Praman. Shabda Praman means you have to read the scripture and you have to accept the word. And one of the biggest barrier in accepting spiritual life is that whatever written in the scripture, we don't accept it. Now, how do we look into this? How do we understand this? So the point is, let us first of all touch upon the important big pillar items and the big ticket items. And then later on, maybe we can go further into these items separately. So when we touch upon these big ticket items, there will be a little more overarching understanding of the concept of Vedas, spirituality, and so on. And then, I mean, whoever are interested, we can dive further, deeper, and so on. Yeah.
Can I add one thing?
Yes.
Here?
Yes, Gunjanji.
Somebody who asked the question that whether it's okay to read Bhagavad Gita in college life, and you correctly answered that, yeah, we can start reading it sooner. So once and also you mentioned about the scriptures, like to have faith in the scriptures. So, but there is one scripture which mentions, which is Srimad Bhagavatam, that there is a particular verse which clearly says that, from Kaumaram age, which is like 5 years of age itself, Prahlad Maharaj requests, that we should start reading the scriptures. So really, I mean, college is actually pretty late. We should start way sooner, as soon as we start understanding, again at a very lower level, and gradually take it, start introducing higher concepts. But yeah, it's not that college level, it's too early. It's not. You're definitely, you all are 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, or something in that range. Definitely, I mean, the sooner you start, the better it is. And that's the whole purpose that we started this Gift of Knowledge initiative, to try to reach out to students like you in this prime youth time, that you get this knowledge before you go out, in your jobs and all that, in that kind of world situation where you'll be using the knowledge, not only the academic knowledge, but also the spiritual knowledge. So yeah, college life, definitely you are, it's a perfect time for you to learn it, and even start applying it sooner in your life, so that later you don't have the regret that, oh, I wish I knew it at that time. Because you can apply it in so many areas of life, including relationships and whatnot. Bhagavad Gita gives you tools to handle so many situations in life, and you can start applying it right now itself. So yeah, thank you.
So in our Vedic literatures, there is a concept called Garbhadhan Sanskar. So when the parents are about to conceive a child, there is a sanskar done. The ritual is done, and the objective of that ritual is that we attract a spiritually oriented soul into the womb. So we were talking about starting reading Bhagavad Gita or starting spirituality in childhood or so. Actually, in the Vedic literature, it starts from the conception stage. Before even you conceive the child, Garbhadhan Sanskar is there. So spirituality is actually ingrained. It is intertwined so closely with the Vedic literature that you cannot separate this. So the concept of soul is really fundamental to the whole understanding of the Vedas, Bhagavad Gita, and so on. Yeah. And this is not unfounded, unscientific, as we just discussed. There are a lot of pointers which indicates that yes, it does make sense. Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. I will then now stop the recording and stop the meeting. Thanks all for joining me. Thank you.